What do you say we just rope Madison in and tell her she can't go to college? Madison and Morgan, and we don't want them to leave. But we know we have to let go, and they'll be going on their way a few short months. So we've been on this journey with John the Revelator and the horses, those famous horses of the apocalypse have ridden. And we've learned by paying attention to them that the time between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ is a time where we can expect hardship, difficulty, suffering. You may remember what Jesus said. He puts it very simply, very succinctly, in just the briefest of terms, but so pregnant. He said, in the world you will have, what did he say? You will have trouble. Other translations say tribulation. There's different words. But in the world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. We've noted that heaven is moving, that we can always be confident, no matter where we're at in life experience, no matter what challenges we face. We've noticed that heaven is moving, heaven is engaged. We can expect that engagement. We can be confident that Christ is very near, the Christ of the cross, just like the hymn we read moments ago. Jesus is very near. We can expect that. We also saw that down through the ages, we can expect that the church will not always be the epitome of strength and faithfulness. That Christ's church has struggled and has fallen away and has lost the proper path. And so we can expect this kind of dynamic within the church, even those called to belong to God. We also saw that the Lord moves as the one who opposes, not because He wants to hurt and harm, but He can move in opposition because He wants to turn us and draw us back into proper paths. And He chastens us as legitimate sons who belong to Him for our well-being. We saw all of these things in chapter 6. But before moving on past verse 10 in this chapter, I think it's verse 10, somewhere in there, or just say before moving on to the fifth seal, I wanted to take a little bit closer look together with you at this idea of discipline, of the Lord exercising corrective discipline in our lives. And I wanted to do that by actually moving out of the book of Revelation to the Psalms. And we want to look together this morning at Psalms 39. And we want to try, our whole purpose in looking into this psalm and trying to listen to what it has for us, our whole purpose is we want to try to gain some key insights into what does it take to receive discipline well. And it's not a sure thing that discipline is received well. Sometimes discipline is given and it's received very poorly and doesn't accomplish the ends for which it was administered. But that's not the crowd we want to be in. We want to be in that crowd that has received discipline well. And because we know from Revelation 6 that this experience of trouble and even chastisement and corrective discipline. We can expect that that will be the experience of God's people all down between the first and second comings. We're especially keen to know, how can I learn to receive discipline well, to receive correction well, to suffer well? How can I learn that? That's what we want to try to get a hold of this morning. Now, Psalms 39 is not the easiest of Psalms. The commentators are all over the map, and whenever you see that happen, you know that they're struggling to figure out, what is this saying to us? Because one says this and another says that. And so I'm not going to worry about the commentators this morning. I'm simply going to share with you what I have seen in this psalm, and you can weigh it for yourself on your own time. Regardless, I think that we will find some things in this psalm together that are tremendously helpful and instructive and encouraging. But again, it's not a particularly easy psalm to understand. Individual lines may jump out and grab a hold of us and speak to us in some way, but the psalm as a whole, we kind of may wonder what's going on here. So I'd like to approach it in a way a little different than usual. I want to begin, well, perhaps the best thing to do would be to read it. It's not real long, so I'll read it, and then I want to begin by just pointing out the major movements in the psalm without diving down too much into details. So let's read it together, and then we'll point these out. The Psalm of David and begins this way. I said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth as with a muzzle, while the wicked are in my presence. I was mute and silent. I refrained even from good, and my sorrow grew worse. My heart was hot within me. While I was musing, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. Lord, make me to know my end. And what is the extent of my days? Let me know how transient I am. Behold, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my lifetime as nothing in your sight. Surely every man at his best is a mere breath. Surely every man walks about as a phantom. Surely they make an uproar for nothing. He amasses riches and does not know who will gather them. And now, Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you. Deliver me from all my transgressions. Make me not the reproach of the foolish. I have become mute. I do not open my mouth, because it is you who have done it. Remove your plague from me. Because of the opposition of your hand, I am perishing. With reproofs, you chasten a man for iniquity. You consume as a moth what is precious to him. Surely every man is a mere breath. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Do not be silent at my tears. For I am a stranger with you, a sojourner like all my fathers. Turn your gaze away from me, that I may smile again before I depart and am no more. So there it is, the psalm as a whole. How do we make sense of this and understand its message to us? Again, I'd like to start out by just pointing out the basic divisions of the psalm. I think it'll help us to not be overwhelmed by the complexity of the things said, and we can begin to get a hold of, well, what's actually happening here. So first of all, I just want to point out that in verses 1 to 3, not diving in again to what he's actually saying, but the thing that is evident to us as we read those verses is that David is in trouble. He's in trouble. He's not at peace. He's not just kicked back on his heels and enjoying an afternoon and saying, what a wonderful day it is. He's in trouble. And you see it in things. You see, first of all, that there's this sense of anxiety and danger that he gives expression to. He needs to guard himself somewhere, in some way. And he's concerned that if he doesn't guard himself, he will actually sin. He will act against God. So he's wrestling with his own heart. Not just a mild wrestle. The expressions are pretty intense. And then he says in verse 2, I was mute and silent. He's so troubled that he can't speak. There's this churning inside of him, and if you tried to engage him, he would probably ignore you at this point, because he's very consumed with what is going on within. You ever feel that way? Feel that the troubles of your heart have grown such that you don't even want to speak? Someone tries to engage you, and you wish you could just hide somewhere because you're busy. You're busy with burdens that feel very heavy. That's what David's feeling. He's mute and silent. And in the context, he even refrains from the good that he might usually do. I mean, you see a picture here of a man kind of being shut down, as it were, and the normal patterns and the normal activities that he would engage in. He's kind of being shut down. His trouble is so great. And his heart, he says, is hot within him. There's intensity there. There's a battle there. Now, I'll just mention it briefly. I'm not going to go into it right now. But the whole source of this trouble is the presence of the wicked. You see that there in the end of verse 1. He's saying, I'm going to kind of zip my lip and not speak and be quiet as long as the wicked are. One translation, we were looking at this in prayer meeting the other night, and Jose's translation said, as long as the wicked are before me. I thought to myself later, I wonder if this is the same phrase, the same word where you have, I forget which psalm it is, where the psalmist says, the Lord is ever before me. It's possible it's the same Hebrew word, the same phrase. But here David is saying, instead of the Lord before me, the wicked are before me. The wicked are in my presence. And in some way we haven't yet tried to understand or dug into, this is the source, of this battle that is raging within him. But for right now, I just want to simplify those 3 verses down to the basic idea that David is in real trouble. Moving on to the next verses 4 through 6, as I read it, is the next logical section of this psalm, of this prayer. And in 4 through 6, well, we see that he begins to pray. In 1 through 3, it's describing David, but now in 4 through 6, David begins to pray. And we'll look in a few moments at the content or the direction of his prayer. So he prays, and then in verses 7, the prayer, he continues praying, but the focus of the prayer shifts somewhat, and we'll look at that in a bit. And so through 7 through 11, he's praying. And then in the last 2 verses, 12 and 13, he's still praying. So you have trouble and then prayer, prayer, prayer. And the only reason I've divided the the whole of his prayer is that it does have sections to it. As you read it and think about it, you see, well, he's focused here, and then his focus shifts, and he's focused on another issue or question, and then finally he's focused at the end in the last two verses on yet something else. And so this is the first step I wanted to take in trying to understand this. Trouble, followed by prayer, and the prayer is kind of a threefold prayer, as it were. So we've got that in our minds now. And with that basic framework, that initial pattern, let's try to understand a little bit more. This trouble, I'm trying to decide whether I should comment on it much. Maybe take just a couple moments here. We're curious and we'd like to know, well, what was his trouble? Don't you feel that if you encounter a friend and they look very troubled? You're not satisfied if they just tell you, well, I'm troubled. Goodbye. We want to know, what are you troubled? How are you troubled? The way I read this, and I'll show you the reason why, David is troubled in this way because he is being tempted into sin, and it feels almost overpowering. Well, you say, where do you see that? How do we see that in these first three verses? Well, let's notice the clues. He senses a need to guard himself. Why would you guard yourself if the road was easy and there was no allure off the pathway? He's wanting to guard himself. And then he says, I'm going to not speak, because he's worried that if he speaks, he will sin. So do you see the wrestle there? David is not troubled here because some tragedy has happened. He's troubled here because the presence of the wicked have aroused something in him which is proving to be a real temptation. The pattern that he sees in the life of the wicked, the things he observes, is a temptation for him. And so he's trying to guard himself. He's trying not to speak because he doesn't want to betray God. His heart is torn. He loves God. He's God's child. He's the anointed one. He knows that he has been chosen to be king over all Israel. And yet here he is in this context, in this situation, the wicked before him, surrounding him. And he's wrestling with temptation. He's wrestling not to betray God. I find very helpful, and I'll just take us there real quickly. I find very helpful Psalms 73, where we find a psalm written by Asaph. And I think because of some of the parallels between the language of these two psalms, that Asaph is dealing with the same issue that David was dealing with. And to just summarize real quickly, Asaph says, God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet came close to stumbling. My steps had almost slipped. Well, why? What was the occasion of Asaph's trouble? That he almost betrays God, that he almost stumbles spiritually. Well, he tells us in verse 3 of Psalm 73. For, and here's the cause of his trouble, I was envious of the arrogant as I saw the prosperity of the wicked. He's looking at their lives and he says, now wait a minute. Something's not right here. I'm following God. I'm pursuing Him. I'm seeking to know His work of purifying my heart and making me a faithful child. I've been doing all of these things, and my life is hard. So Asaph goes on to say, I'm afflicted. Things are hard. Things are tough. But look at them. They're not seeking God at all. They're proud. They're arrogant. They're independent. They do what they want. And look at what he says. He says, there's no pains in their death, and their body is fat. They are not in trouble as other men, nor are they plagued like mankind. Therefore pride is their necklace. The garment of violence covers them. Their eye bulges from fatness. The imaginations of their heart run riot. They mock and wickedly speak of oppression. They speak from on high. They have set, you see the parallels here? They have set their mouth against the heavens. And their tongue parades through the earth. There's connections to Psalms 39. Verse 11, they say, how does God know? And is there knowledge with the Most High? Behold, these are the wicked, and always at ease. They have increased in wealth. Another connection with Psalms 39, the mention of wealth. But then we come to the temptation of the psalmist in verse 13. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure. He's saying, Lord, I've kept my heart pure, but I'm not sure it's done me any good. That's what he's feeling. And I washed my hands in innocence. And that all feels vain because I've been stricken all day long and chastened every morning. But then look at verse 15. This is where I find especially the connection between this psalm and Psalms 39. It's in verse 15 there. If I had said, I will speak thus. If I had said the things that I was feeling inside that were running around in my head, behold, I would have betrayed. I would have betrayed the generation of your children, God. You see the connection there? I'm suggesting that this was the same sin temptation that David was wrestling with. That's why he said, I've got to zip my lip and I've got to muzzle my mouth so that I don't speak. You see, let's put this in the context of David's life. He'd been anointed king. He had accomplished great things for God and with God. But it aroused the jealousy of the seated king, Saul, and Saul is chasing him. And he's been chased for months and years, and he's tired of being chased. I didn't take the time, it would be a fruitful thing to do, to look up how long did Saul actually chase David. I'm not sure. But it was quite a while. Thank you, Steve. And he's getting tired. He's getting tired of being afflicted and chased and hiding in holes and caves in the ground. And he's tempted to say, surely I have kept myself pure in vain. It hasn't done me any good, nor has it done anybody else any good. He's worn out. He's tempted to doubt the goodness of God in the context of what he is suffering. But not only that, he's tempted to look and think the wicked have it better than I do. And this comes out, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I think that was David's temptation. And I think that this temptation occurred. I can't prove this, but this just seems to make sense to me. I think that this temptation occurred right at the end of Saul's life when David actually got so tired of being chased, he moved in with the Philistines. He moved right in. You can read about it at the end of 2 Samuel. He moves in with the Philistines. I forget, I read it this morning, but I'm forgetting right now the name of that Philistine lord, that Philistine king, but he says, "Oh, David, you've come to be with us. Welcome, welcome. Here's a city. You can have this city and live there." He gives him a city. David ends up at the end of their army as they go to fight Saul. He's back there in the ranks, and until the other Philistines' lord said, no, not him. He's been too much against us, and we don't know what he'll do in the heat of battle. Get him out of here. So I'm suggesting that this is the context in which David said, "The wicked were ever before me." That's what he was seeing. And in that context, this terrible temptation comes to him. And he's torn with the intensity and the difficulty of this temptation. Do we understand and realize how difficult temptation can be? Are you aware? Are you alive to that in your own experience? How pitched the battle can become? Heart grows hot within you, and so that's my observation on David's trouble. But let's move on. Let's try to understand a bit more what's happening here in the prayer that follows. I think it's tremendous and fantastic that when David finally speaks, it's not a curse against the Lord. It's a prayer. He speaks to the Lord. He doesn't speak to the Philistines and say, "Boy, the God I've been following, he just let me down." He doesn't say it. He speaks to the Lord. But what I find interesting is that as he speaks, it's not the usual, "Lord, I need this, I need that." It is in a way, but he actually asks for something very specific, doesn't he? You see that there? He says, "Lord, make me to know." That's a slightly different kind of prayer. He's not saying, "Lord, save me from this," or "deliver me from that," or "heal me from this." No, he's saying, "Make me to know something. Make me to know my end. And what is the extent of my days? Let me know how transient I am." And then he goes on to talk. He kind of reflecting aloud in the midst of his prayer. "Behold, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my lifetime is nothing in your sight." And then he shifts away from himself. He says, actually, the whole lot of us, surely every man at his best is a mere breath. Every man walks about as a phantom. So David is praying for this specific insight. And why is he asking to be reminded of how transient and how vaporous the existence of mankind is? Why is he asking for that? Why is he praying about this in particular? Well, I want to suggest to you that he asked for this because of the nature of the trouble he was experiencing. He is tempted to join the arrogant, the ones who are ignoring God, who are not listening to God or seeking to follow God. He's tempted to join them because their lives seem so much easier and even better than his own. And he asked to see his end, which includes seeing their end, because he knows this is the corrective for the thing that he's being tempted with. Every man walks about as a phantom. Surely they, now he's pointing to the wicked whose pattern has tempted him, surely they make an uproar for nothing. He amasses riches and does not know who will gather them. So David is asking for this specific insight because he knows he needs to be corrected. He asks for this insight. Let me put it slightly differently. Because in the midst of wrestling with his trouble, he has come to see that there is something in him in his heart which is not right. There's something in him that he's maybe it's just a tendency towards the wrong or a leaning towards the wrong. He has seen something in his heart that is not right, and it disturbs him. And so he requests, the things he requests are a correction. He's saying, Lord, I need to be corrected here. I see this in myself, but I also see I need your help to correct this. Help me to see clearly so that this thing in me is taken care of and moved out of my heart. You see, he craves the kind of insight from God that will set his thinking and his feeling right. I think that's really, really important. One of the things I see here in this section is that really the tremendous value of suffering and difficulty in our lives is often, it's only in the context of our suffering and difficulty that things come to the surface from the depths of our hearts that need to be changed. You see that here? David's wrestling with this tremendous problem, and as he wrestles with that problem, he realizes, there's something in me that is not right. And I want to suggest to you that that's one of the tremendous values of any experience of difficulty or suffering. It becomes a context in which I can see my own heart in ways that I might not have seen otherwise. So that's what I see in this first section of his prayer. He's conscious. He's aware. Something's not right in me. Lord, I need help here. But then in the second section of the prayer, starting in verse 7, now, Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you. Deliver me. In this section, he affirms the true source of his hope. He's no longer, he's starting to break free of the strength of that temptation that, oh man, where you should really put your hope is in power and wealth and riches. That's what the wicked were doing. But that's starting to lose its grip on him. He's starting to gain some freedom from that temptation. And he begins to affirm again, no, my hope is here. It's just with the Lord. That's where I'm going to find hope. And he appeals for forgiveness because he knows that he's been astray in his thinking. But the thing I want to point out most is that what happens in this section is David begins to recognize that God has been with him in the midst of his difficulty. That instead of all that struggle that he experienced happening far off and away from God, he begins to recognize, no, God has been with me. In fact, he even says, you did it, Lord. I was mute and silent. I was wrestling so hard because you were in this somehow. You did this. You were present, not absent like I thought. And you were pursuing me. Then he cries out, remove your stroke. Now my version says plague. But I looked the word up and I don't think that's the best choice for this passage. I don't think the Lord had struck him with sickness or something else like that, although I don't know for sure. But the word can also be translated stroke, like you're paddling me, Lord. You're giving me blows of correction. Please stop. I think I've learned my lesson, kind of what he's saying. With reproofs, and then he summarizes, with reproofs you chasten a man for iniquity. You consume as a moth what is precious to him. You see the correction. And But the thing again that I want us to see most in this section of the prayer is that God is actually here. He's not absent. And he could see that the hand and purpose of God, he could see that now as God's purposes were being worked out in the pain and the trouble that he had been experiencing. That God was actually doing something for him in that context. And yet, having said that, even then, and David is so honest here, and it's encouraging and beautiful to us, when he gets to the end of his prayer, he says, "Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Do not be silent at my tears, for I am a stranger with you, a sojourner like all my fathers. Turn your gaze away from me, that I may smile again before I depart and am no more." In essence, David was saying, Lord, I grew from that, I profited from that, I've learned important things, but that was hard. That was really hard. And I find this honesty of David very refreshing. This isn't the stoic Christian who says, nothing touches me. Yeah, the Lord can do this, the Lord can do that, I can suffer great things, but nothing touches me. No, he's saying, that was hard. And then he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, God, I'm not sure how much more of that I can handle. And you hear this very honest human note in that. Because we feel that way sometimes, don't we? Haven't you felt that way at times in your life journey? I'm not sure how much more of this I can handle. And so David is honest. So there it is. We see this outline in the psalm. There's trouble. There's the recognition in himself of weakness and need. There's the recognition that even in the midst of his trouble, God has been present, pursuing him, seeking to accomplish important things for him. And then there's also the recognition that that's really hard, Lord. I hope there's not too much more of this that has to be done. I hope the rest of the ground, there's not too much more ground to be covered, because that was hard. I think of a statement made in the book Patriarchs and Prophets by the author Ellen White. She talks about Moses and how God chastened him to mature him before he took on the major part of his life work, which was leading Israel. And she makes this very interesting comment. At times, the work in Moses' heart and life, let's see, I got to catch this quote. Let me put it in this. This isn't the exact quote, but the chastening, and this is the exact quote, was almost too much for human nature to bear. God puts us in the heat. It's not comfortable. We go to Hebrews 12 in a few moments. It's not comfortable. No discipline is pleasant at the time. Almost too much for human nature to bear. It can be very hard, and I'm so thankful that David gives expression to that. Because if he hadn't, we might be tempted to feel when we're in the heat, something's wrong with me. I missed something. I must be doing something wrong. And it can derail us. But David here says, no, it can be very hard. So there we see it, the basic pattern in the psalm. But I want to draw from this in just the few minutes we have left, and moving very quickly. You may want to, if you're taking notes, you want to make note and think about these things later. But I want to just summarize some things that I think are key insights that are really vital as we suffer the challenges and difficulties of life. So here they are. Number one, when we are in hard territory, when we are being pushed hard and tested hard, there's a great necessity of wisdom. And the reason I say this is not only is God seeking to use difficulty in our lives, there's an opposing power who seeks to use that difficulty as well. Satan. And you can read the book of Job. It's quite fascinating. Satan uses difficulty to try to crush Job and to try to destroy Job. God is using difficulty to refine and to challenge and to help us see the places where we still need to grow and help us see where He still wants to take us. God is using suffering and difficulty for positive ends. But at the very same time, Satan comes in and he tries to use suffering and difficulty to crush and destroy, to separate us from God, to break our hold on God, and to discourage us. And so in this process of knowing difficulty and knowing challenge, it's very important that we have the wisdom of God to discern the ways in which Satan might try to take a hold of our suffering and interpret it as he would have us see it in order to crush and destroy our faith. The whole book of Job is an exploration of that theme, where God is using suffering in one way. Job says, when I come forth from this, I will be as gold. He knows that as hard as it is, that his difficult trials are, God is doing something in him that is making him a better person. He knows that, but he also fights this tremendous battle. Satan is trying to interpret his sufferings as the rejection of God, trying to convince him, you're completely off track, man, and you might as well give up hope. If you were on track, Satan says, your life wouldn't be so hard. If you were really with God, you wouldn't be experiencing these things. And so it's vital that as we are in a place of chastening, that we have the wisdom of God to discern Satan's lies about our very experience, while at the same time understanding what is it that God wants to do for me in this difficult place. We need the wisdom of God. The next thing which we desperately need when we're in an experience of suffering and trial is we need humility. Just want to turn real quickly over to the book of Hebrews, chapter 12. And you'll hear there this very accent. He talks about discipline and how we should not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when we're reproved by Him. This is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 5. Verse 6, for those whom the Lord loves, He disciplines, and He scourges every son whom He receives. It's for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? He goes on to say, if you're without discipline, then you should be worried about your spiritual condition. Then he says, we've had earthly fathers, and they disciplined us for our good, and we respected them. And here's this element of humility that comes in. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? What's it mean to be subject in the context of chastening and trial? Well, it means to accept it. To not chafe and fight and push back and mumble and groan and complain, but on some level to learn to accept it before Him. To accept the difficulty, to accept the pain, to say, God, this is really hard, but I will not let go of you. What do you have for me here? What are you seeking to accomplish? Let me lean into your purpose here. There's a humble acceptance rather than a chafing and an arrogant, why are you doing this to me? I don't deserve this. Humble acceptance. He does this for our good, verse 10 tells us. Verse 11, yet those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Beautiful picture there. So the necessity of humility. If we do not learn humility, we will always have a difficult time with our suffering. If we learn humility, if we learn to accept and look to God and say, well, Lord, this is hard, but I'll trust in you, it will produce in our lives with peaceful fruit of righteousness. You may yet know suffering, but you have peace in the heart. Third thing, we should expect. We've seen how in Psalms 39, David wrestled with feeling disoriented and confused and his heart hot within him, and he's pulled this way and that. We should expect in the times of greatest difficulty to feel disoriented. It's normal, it's natural to feel overwhelmed, to feel disoriented. Suffering tends towards confusion. It's always that way. Hard to get a clear vision. Hard to see clearly. Back to Psalms 39, that's why David pleads and cries out as he begins to open his mouth to God, "Let me see clearly." The suffering had blurred his vision. And so we should expect in the context of suffering to feel disoriented. And the fourth thing, seek when in suffering to speak God words. Speak first there. Don't speak to the Philistines. Don't speak first to family. Go to God. Speak God words. Engage God. When in the thick of the suffering, when you open your mouth, open it to Him, to cry out to Him, to ask for these things we've talked about, to ask for wisdom, to ask for proper perspective, to ask for humility. Quest for understanding in your suffering, understanding of places in you that still need to be changed, understanding of not necessarily the why. That's the question we tend to ask. Why? Why should I have to suffer this way? No, shift your question. Don't ask the why question. Ask the how question. How do I move through this, God? How do I endure this? And how am I to profit by it? How am I to be changed by this? These are the crucial questions. I was thinking this morning about an experience I had it was probably 9 or 10 months before my father died. It was a Friday afternoon, and I loved softball. And I had purchased a new bat and a new ball. And we lived on a farm. And out behind the house, there was a big area of lawn. And then beyond the lawn, there was a garden area. But at that time of the year, it was just mostly weeds. And then there was pasture beyond that. And so I didn't have anybody to play ball with. But I would go out and I would just throw the ball up and hit it. And I'd hit it as far as I could, and then I'd walk over to where the ball was, and I'd hit it back this way, and I'd hit it back and forth, just practicing hitting. And I was in seventh heaven. I love hitting the ball. And my dad came out of the house. I'd been hitting the ball for a while, and he said, "Rob, you need to put the ball and the bat away. I need your help with a few chores, and Sabbath's coming." And I didn't want to put the ball and the bat away. I was willful. I felt inside, I don't want to. But I begrudgingly started kind of shuffling towards the house. But I got a little bit closer to the house. I think I was up on the lawn then, and I thought, I'm going to hit it one more time. And I threw it up and I hit it towards the house. And on the left side of the house, from that back side, was the kitchen. And this is an architect designed home, so it had big high windows that were like 12, 14-foot high windows on the end of the kitchen there with kind of wood frame. And so the upper windows were separated, fortunately, from the lower windows, because my ball only broke one of the lower windows that was about this size. And my father said, "Rob, give me your bat and your ball." He took them away from me. And he said, "I'll have to think about how long I'll hold on to these." I was not happy. I was not humble. My vision blurred. I became angry. What right does he have? I bought that with my own money, that ball and that bat. What right does he have to take it away from me? I didn't accept the discipline. I thought about that this morning. And I saw a different picture in my mind. I thought of what might have been. And in my imagination, I could see the beauty of a son who responded humbly. And when the discipline came, said, "Dad, you know you're right. My heart was wrong. I see the wrong that was in my heart. Dad, could you help me out with this? I'm not very good at this. And I'm just a kid, and I love this, and you told me to stop, and I was mad. And can you help me out, Dad? Could you help me get some perspective?" You think my dad would have blown me off and pushed me to the curb? And no, what a beautiful moment that could have been. If in humility, in the chastening, I had taken refuge in the one who was moving to discipline me, to correct me, to teach me. That's a beautiful picture, isn't it? A picture of father and son, father and child, father and daughter. That's who God is in our lives. He will correct us. He will chasten us. We've talked last week, there's suffering that doesn't come directly from Him, but He allows it. He's engaged in every moment of challenge in our lives. But oh, to find the humility, cry out to Him, to come to Him, to let the wrong stuff come up and then just give it to Him. Oh, afterwards yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. And I end with one more statement here. Psalms 90. Psalms 90 parallels many of these themes we've looked at, and I just want to read this one verse. Teach us, O God, to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Present to you a heart of wisdom. That's what He's after. Humble trust, crying out to Him, opening our mouths to Him. That's what He will accomplish in you. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we've sought to pay attention to your word. We've sought to learn. Be our teacher even as we go away from here, Lord. May you speak in our hearts and minds. Continue to instruct us. Continue to teach us. Lord, help us most of all to learn how to respond well to life's difficult moments, to find you present in them, to know you accomplishing the things that only you can accomplish. To this end, Lord, we give you our hearts again. In Jesus' name, amen.